Hello and welcome to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends. I am your host, Leon Wolf. Today is Thursday, September the 24th of 2015. We are delighted that you have decided to join us tonight. I am joined by my regular panel of hosts, as always, minus a couple, and we'll get to that here in just a minute. But first, let me introduce our regular panel. We have Jeff Blehar of the Ace of Spades Decision Desk with us, as always. F. Bill McMorris of the Washington Free Beacon is here. Glad to have him here with us. Becket Adams, our semi-regular panelist, filling in for Neal doing until Neal gets back from sabbatical, whenever that is, and if we allow him to come back, which looks more doubtful by the week. Filling in for Scott Lincicome, who had a last-minute emergency, as he often does at these times, we have Caleb Howe of RedState and Truth Revolt. Caleb, glad to have you back. I believe this is your fourth appearance on the show. And here for the second time, we have Joe Cunningham, also of RedState, and we're glad to have everybody with us. Let's get right into the news of the day. All anybody can talk about over the last couple of days, of course, is the Pope's historic visit to Washington, D.C., in which he made a historic address to Congress, ate with some homeless people, and did many things that folks want to talk about. So we're going to go a little bit out of order here so that I can talk with one of our resident papists who actually watched the speech. And so, McMorris, you're going to get the first question today. What do you think about the Pope's performance before Congress? What do you think about the impression that he made in the minds of most people who watched the speech today?
Well, first of all, we can't talk about the Pope without, honoring and thanking him for eating with Caleb Howe and all of the other homeless people at the shelter. That was really nice of him, and it's the type of, situation in which actions speak louder than words, and the Pope kind of put Catholicism out there for everyone to witness. When we're talking about the Pope's address to Congress, of course, even though he's people made the, contention that he's the head of state, that he's the head of his state, and that he, obviously is a champion of pro-life stuff, therefore he should carry our message. That's not the Pope's job. That is the job of Catholics whose vocation is actually trying to persuade people. So I'm not too broken up and bothered by what the Pope said. The Pope does not, when Ann Coulter went on her entire rant yesterday about, American Catholics, this, American Catholics that, she actually proved a good point, and that is that the Pope is not an American Catholic. The Pope is a Catholic. He represents a universal religion with 1 billion people of it worldwide. He knows that there's abortion in America. It doesn't mean he is wholly aware of everything that's gone down over the past couple of weeks, and that what's the most pressing thing to us is not always going to be the most pressing thing to him. So I think these are the types of things that conservatives who are disappointed in the Pope's performance should keep in mind when they're, reviewing it, is that he is a religious figure. He is not a political player, and we complain about, one of the big gripes about Muhammad and the Muslim faith is that it is entirely a political movement that deals in power politics. That's not the Pope's job here. And all in all, I thought it was, a fine address, even if I was disappointed when looking at it strictly through a political lens.
So listen, and I promised myself when I started the show I wasn't going to dog on the Pope, and I'm going to try to keep to that. I definitely understand the point that you're making, Bill, but he wasn't shying away from politics when he talked about immigration or global warming, a lot of other things. It only was when he came to the issue of abortion that he seemed to dodge the questions. So, Caleb, you watched the address from the perspective of a non-Catholic. What was your impression of what he did and said, and specifically with respect to the political issues that he did or didn't touch on?
Yeah, I couldn't disagree more that it was a avoidance of politics because, first of all, as you said, he wasn't avoiding politics. He was happy to bring up liberal political issues. The ones he was afraid to touch were the ones that upset liberals. It's not that he was avoiding things that might make conservatives happy. He was trying to dodge upsetting the liberals that make up such a large portion of American Catholics, which is the audience he was addressing. That's why he said. That's why he specifically addressed the American people. He wasn't addressing.
Did he call for an admissions test? Did he offer any political prescriptions, or did he say
he said
be
the
mindful
words?
of
He
these
couldn't
things?
say the word abortion. Is that the same as asking for an admissions test?
But is that? But
he didn't mind saying the word death penalty.
Yeah, death penalty is something that
can't
hasn't
say
been
abortion?
on the table very long. No, he
What do you mean
talked
it hasn't
about
been on the table
what
very long?
life
For
is at
Catholics?
every stage. What?
What do you mean it hasn't been on the table very
Oh,
long?
I thought
For
I thought
Catholics?
Becket jumped in.
Well, I was just going to
for
jump in for a second before we even get to death penalty. I just wanted to go back to what Caleb was saying. You said he brought political issues being immigration, and the other you said the environment. But going to Bill's point,
I said that.
Well, okay, I'm sorry. Going to your just kind of, I want to round back to that and be like, well, how is that explicitly political on what he said? Like Bill, I think Bill's point.
How is abortion?
Well, I think Bill's point was good, is that he didn't prescribe anything. He said, hey, they're immigrants. Try to open your heart to them. I don't see how that's him being political.
He said we can't wait for future generations to take care of the global warming crisis that faces us. That's what he said.
How's
We
that
can't wait.
political?
What? How is that not political? How it's political? It's exactly as political to preserve life by getting rid of the death penalty, or to preserve life by saying let's stop global warming, as it is to preserve life by saying let's get rid of abortion.
But
It's
he never said
exactly as
anything. He
political.
never said anything about global warming or even the term climate change. He said be good stewards of the earth, which is, if I'm not
He
mistaken.
said air pollution.
No, he didn't. He said
That may have been in his earlier. That may have been in his remarks
he said
to the Cardinals.
detrimental to the environment from man's own doing.
He must have been in his remarks to the Cardinals, because he absolutely called it air pollution. They were making fun of him on MSNBC all day for not calling it global warming.
Well, that's the left.
Hold on, let me break in. Let me get Joe's perspective here. Joe is our guest panelist. Normally,
Wait, but what about the international arms trade? I mean, these are definitely political issues.
Right, and he said don't sell guns to people who are killing people. I don't see how. But how are you?
And
mad
I don't
at
see
that?
how don't
Oh,
kill
why
babies.
are you mad about that?
How
Yeah,
is don't kill babies is somehow just a political football in the United States?
But he did
don't
comment
sell
on that.
arms is he barely commented on
But
it.
see, that's the point, is that he didn't comment as much as you would like to have commented.
It's
on
not
it.
just
that
as
he
much
didn't
as
comment
I
at
would
all.
want
No,
to.
I'm
There's
sorry,
a
the
difference
Pope
between
didn't see it as
there's
his
a difference. There's a difference
step up there
between
under politics.
commenting. There's a difference between commenting on something directly and hinting that maybe this might relate to something. There's a big difference. If this were any other person giving a speech saying we should preserve life at all levels, as opposed to saying we should prevent abortion, would be a point of criticism by any one of you, just like every single day Republicans criticize Obama for not calling terrorism terrorism. It's exactly.
And I think, hold on, let me jump in here. And I think, again, and I have the utmost respect for Catholics, even as a non-Catholic, but I think that this is something that I do. I absolutely do, Bill. And in all seriousness, I mean, this is something that I think that the Catholics, and I understand that you guys have not a job to defend the Pope, but I mean, he's a very important person, and I understand the difficulty that you guys are in, but I tend to agree with Caleb that if you're going to say that the reason that he can't talk about abortion is that abortion is a political issue, to me, or can't talk about it as much, to me, it's every bit as much of a moral issue or more than the environment or immigration or a lot of other things.
Or the death penalty.
Let me go to Joe. Let's get your perspective on this, Joe. What do you think about this as another Catholic on the panel?
I tend to kind of be in the camp that doesn't want to ascribe, political ideology to things that the Pope says. Keep in mind the fact that the Pope comes from a very socialist South American country, and the perspective on politics that he has is very different than the perspective on politics that we have. I think Marco Rubio said it best, addressing the Pope's statements on capitalism, that capitalism to the Pope is that capitalism that we see in South American countries that is very, very corporatist and not very free enterprise. And how does that apply to the other issues where you have to avoid some of these issues because, frankly, political dissent in these countries where he's used to coming from, is kind of, punishable by death and things like that. And granted, as somebody who is fighting for Christ, he should have the courage to stand up there and talk about abortion and say it by name. But at the same time, this is a guy who has, I don't think, been on the world stage as long as some of the other popes that we've had in the past. This guy comes from a very specific country, a very specific ideology, and that translating to global politics and U.S. politics has been very, very difficult for this particular papacy.
Look, again,
can I just jump in there for a
with the
second?
utmost respect, and I'm going to go to Jeff because we haven't heard from him yet. With the utmost respect, I get the background that the Pope comes from, but John Paul came from the background of a country with a communist background as well, and granted, it had largely it's a different background, communist Poland, as opposed to Argentina, where we are now. But I think that John Paul, regardless of the fact that he wasn't politically with the American right on a lot of economic issues, understood where we come from and the value of things like American freedom better than Francis does. Let me go to Jeff. Jeff, you got anything that you want to throw in here? You've been quiet so far.
I guess I would only say this. The Pope seemed to have a lot of courage and a great willingness to bring up all sorts of matters like climate change and free immigration, open borders, and a lot of subjects that are near and dear to the hearts of political liberals, and also, to be fair, probably programmatically Catholic as well. He said none of those things when he was in Cuba just a few days ago, nor did he say anything about political dissidents in Cuba, political prisoners in Cuba, or any of the horrible tyrannical things that the Cuban regime is doing to its people. No, he instead simply posed for publicity shots with Fidel Castro, a noted. Well, then finish. Then correct me if I'm wrong. But I know what he didn't. He didn't do what Pope John Paul II did when Pope John Paul II went to speak in Poland in 1979, and he demanded that the Polish authorities, basically, he got the crowd chanting, "We want God. We want God to come back into the public square. We want God back into society." Now, I'm aware of the fact that the communist regime in Cuba has somewhat softened up on the Catholic Church and the public practice of Catholicism in previous years, and I suppose that there may have been a political calculation made on the Pope's part that he doesn't want to lose any of those gains that have been created for the Catholic Church. But I find it to be altogether too simple to just say, oh, the Pope is only talking about certain things and he's not going to talk about abortion. Well, he didn't really want to make any truly uncomfortable statements in front of the Castro brothers when he had the opportunity. Now, Becket, if you want to correct me on this, please go ahead.
Right. Well, during his trip in Cuba, a first point that I want to make, just circling back real fast, is that I wanted to clarify, I would have liked personally for Francis to have come out harder and maybe use the bully pulpit, as I think as Americans we really enjoy seeing that, which, if nothing else, would explain the rise of Trump. That's just not Francis's style, unfortunately. I would have liked to see that.
I think Jeff's point is valid, Becket. That John Paul would not have given a crap. I mean, he would have absolutely gone in there.
I'm be the last person you would see who would try to say that Francis is better. I love John Paul II. I love Benedict. I miss both of them very much. Unfortunately, I think Francis is a little softer, and I can't deny that. But to the point of Cuba, I do think it's been unfair how it's been portrayed. Between the gift that he gave Castro, which was a book of sermons from a Catholic who had to flee from Havana during the revolution when they were slaughtering Catholics, it was a gift he gave to Fidel Castro, not too subtle. And then two of the separate masses he said, he prayed for the exiles and talked about trying to reunify the Cubans and at the same time encourage them to overcome the political norms. I think those were 2 or 3 pretty big statements that he made over in Cuba. Now, if anything, maybe he's tailoring his message. That, again, and I don't want to, like Leon was saying, it seems like, we have sort of that obligation to defend. I don't think that's entirely fair, and I would like to avoid that appearance, but I do think it's important to know that he has done some of these things, and maybe give him credit where that's due.
Hey, question for you. You bring up JP2. I'm sorry, St. John Paul the Great.
Oh,
Jeff, and talk about his speech in Poland. Why didn't you talk about the speech he gave in Cuba?
Are you referring to John Paul's speech in Cuba? John Paul's speech in Cuba. And well, I'm not a student of history, so you may want to inform me about it.
Anyway, when he walked into Cuba, both of these popes before Francis, neither of them issued the blistering commentary we got from, say, Mother Teresa at the National Prayer Breakfast, or John Paul II when he was in Poland. When you have a substantial Catholic population in a country and you're pleading with an atheistic government not to slaughter and imprison them, you tiptoe around. It's the kind of esoteric messaging that you have with that Strauss talked about so much. And throughout history, I'm assuming you guys are all somewhat familiar with the idea of esoteric messaging, especially you because it's in your Twitter handle. You can afford to be subtle. Our generation is pretty used to soundbite politics, and we always bitch about them and talk about how they cheapen everything. I don't see anything wrong with subtlety. And I was at the speech, and when the Pope was talking about the most vulnerable among us, the woman in front of me said aloud what I thought in my head, which was, oh, babies, because we thought he was going to talk about abortion. I was completely taken aback when he said the death penalty thing, and I was saying, man, that was a letdown. A letdown. I'm not going to lie. I wish he walked out there and said what Carly Fiorina said, but he is not there to get anybody elected into office. He's there to win souls, and maybe that's not the message. Maybe he'll walk into godless New York and tell them to go out there and Leon's covering.
I just can't. I understand that, Bill.
It doesn't even address the point.
Wait. Can I just make a note that Bill said that it's okay for us to have a little soundbite nation, but he took 7 minutes to say it. Isn't that kind of counterintuitive there?
That's Jeff's stick.
No, assholes.
We won't have Bill trying to steal it.
I said he went beyond sound bites and talked subtlety.
That is right.
So listen, I get that, Bill. I respect that. If that's going to be his stance, then fine. Also, let's not have us being lectured on the environment and on our immigration policy. Okay? If that's going to be the stance you're going to take, that's fine. I'm absolutely fine with it. But be consistent across the board. Come out there and talk about saving souls and so on and so forth. To me, the issue of abortion is 10 times more important than really the air quality. And I know you're with me. And I guess.
And I'm a closed borders guy.
Right. Well, and I guess here's my point. And I'll throw this back over to Joe. We haven't heard from him in a while. I mean. We say that the Pope is not a political figure, and I don't want to bring John Paul back into this discussion because I think John Paul was a relatively popular figure on both sides. But if you compare this Pope to Benedict, I mean, I think that the American right, regardless of the fact that he never came out and said it, understood that Benedict was a Pope who was not on our side, but at least understood our side and how to play the game so as not to play into the hand of leftists. Do you think that that's something that this Pope could get better at, or even has any interest in getting better at as time goes on?
I think if we're referring to Benedict and the current guy, I think that we can see them both kind of as transitional popes in that Benedict, definitely older, definitely, policy-wise for the Vatican and for the Catholic Church, not much there. He's kind of a transitional guy, and I think when you look at the current papacy and what we've got, I think that we're seeing a shift in public appearance, maybe still transitional, but definitely more one of those kind of popes that is there solely for the PR before the Catholic Church maybe rights the ship.
Caleb, before the Pope ever got here, he was embroiled in some amount of controversy that we've kind of touched on in an ancillary matter. What do you make of his refusal to meet with the dissidents in Cuba? And Marco Rubio had kind of an interesting point about that as well. What's your understanding of what? I mean, was that something that the Castro basically prevented him from doing, or is that something that he just decided not to do? And if so, is that something that he should have forced the issue on? Is I want to go see these dissidents?
I'm actually going to just totally table your question, and because I've been chopping at the bit to respond to something else. So I'll just I think that the thing that bothers me about the discussion between the Catholics and the non-Catholics who are talking about this in a political sphere like we have right now or on Twitter is that the Catholics, when you say, for example, I wish he had been more direct about abortion, but that's not necessarily what he's here to do. That is a fine thing to say. That's a fine thing to say. When you say he didn't say it because he's not talking about politics, that's when you meet an argument, because he was talking about politics. He was talking about politics, just avoided that one topic. And it's not like I sat here and said he shouldn't. I didn't bring up anything about economic policy. I didn't say he shouldn't have said any of the other. All I said was he didn't directly address abortion, and I think that there are plenty of Catholics who were let down, and they said so. All over social media.
I just said I was let down.
Caleb, you're right on that. Caleb, I'm gonna pimp one of my. I actually wrote about this. There are a couple of pro-life groups came out after the speech saying he missed a major opportunity, and one of the groups is a big Catholic group. So, I mean, you're not wrong. You're not alone on that. And if I just actually, because I know you tabled his question, I just want to answer that right now in case anyone's wondering. Francis did try to meet with the dissidents, and that was Castro, Raul Castro basically barred it. I don't think Francis's people pushed it hard enough. That's what I gathered from the reports I read. But he did make an effort. The Vatican did push for it. Maybe not forcefully enough, in case anyone was wondering.
I was going to add, it's a bad week for dissidents because just today, Ted Cruz tried to get unanimous consent to rename the street in front of the Chinese embassy for a political dissident and was derailed by Dianne Feinstein, who basically said, "Oh, this just sounds like a political move." And it's, well, of course it's a political move, but it's all. I mean, obviously it's a lot more than that too. It's symbolic and everything else. And I just think from the party of, yes, all women hashtag activism, it's absolutely absurd to object to a concrete thing like changing the street name, particularly since it's something that we've done before, that we did in the 80s against the Soviet Union. So it's been a bad week for dissidents, both in Cuba and China.
Yeah, it's well, I'll get off into that tangent. So I mean, Becket or Bill or Joe. So let's imagine, you guys understand the position of the Pope probably better than Caleb and Jeff and I do. But if you're the Pope and you're in a public appearance with Castro, you say, I want to go meet with the dissidents, and Castro says no. I mean, is there any place for the Pope to basically step in and say, I'm going to go and stop me if you want to create an international incident and have a major media firestorm about the Pope getting shot on Cuban soil? I mean, that seems like it would be kind of more of a Mother Teresa thing to do, but I mean, could you envision this Pope or any other Pope, making such a move?
Pope could do it, but I think, as Bill Point made, that there's a weird tightrope act he's trying to walk where he doesn't want retaliation against the actual faithful who live there. The Pope gets to go home afterwards. These people still live there, so if he creates a situation like that it embarrasses a madman with an army. It's it'd be like in North Korea. What happens if you piss off Kim Jong-un? The people suffer. It's not going to be the guy visiting for a little while. Maybe that's it. If it were me, I would have pushed harder. I mean, for me, but at the same time, I think
the ladies in white were turned out hardcore for Benedict's speech, and Castro, as soon as Benedict was gone and they said their nice words, rounded them all up. The Pope, Castro used Benedict's appearance in Cuba basically to pinpoint exactly who to arrest. Yeah. And I definitely understand. Benedict's the type who's like, hey guys, Jesus was hated for, being Jesus as well. They're gonna hate you too, so don't worry about it. Francis, I guess, is a little softer.
So Jeff, let me go to you for the final question on the Pope, and then hopefully we'll move off. It doesn't really seem to me that we had these kinds of discussions, and I know you've been following politics, as long as I have. We didn't seem to have, at least that I recall, these kinds of discussions about Benedict. I remember there were a lot of liberals who were mad at things that Benedict did, but I don't remember on the right that we had these kinds of discussions about either Benedict or John Paul. Those are the only two popes that have been around, since I've been alive. What is it about this Pope, do you think, that causes him to be such a lightning rod political figure? Do you think he's aware of it, and do you think that it's something that he encourages, or is he just oblivious to it and it's kind of accidental on his part?
Well, I mean, the reason that Francis is such a lightning rod is because, first of all, he's I believe the first New World Pope, the first one to come from the Americas. Second, he's very popular with the media because he is if not the first Pope, certainly the first Pope in recent times to be a conventional social progressive and come from a Marxist or a socialist-leaning country in Argentina. And that's his political program. I don't buy for a second, and maybe I'm a non-Catholic, so I don't know what I'm talking about. But I don't know why people are just so afraid to admit that this man comes from Argentina. He's a 60s, 70s era Jesuit essentially, and he talks like one, and he has the same priorities as one. So he's going to talk about those issues now that he is the Pope. And that's why he is exciting to the media. John Paul II was exciting as well, but he was an anti-communist crusader, and he was mainly understood in that context. And Benedict was just sort of, I think, if you're talking about the media's perception of him, this creepy German old guy who was sort of like a skeleton in white robes.
Yeah, he was a Catholic.
Well, right. Listen, I'm not speaking for myself. I'm speaking for the popular media perception.
No. And I get what you're saying, and it was pretty obvious in the speech. We on the American right can be pro-life and pro-tax cuts and pro-free market. He is obviously cut of the stripe of the Christian left, which I totally disagree with, that says that, if only people had more opportunity and were less, they would be less materialistic, and then they would have less abortions. And this was actually my favorite part of the speech, is when he talked about how there are people who want to start families and can't do it because they're poor. But then there are other people who have too many opportunities, too much chance to succeed, so they refuse to have kids. So he took aim at the dinks and the poor at the same time for not wanting to have kids and placing material needs ahead of spiritual ones. And that went totally overlooked, but it plays into the mindset that is plagues the Christian left, and that is grounding everything in materialism. So that's my big critique of the Pope, is that he looks at economics in too materialist a fashion, and he thinks he's being pro-life by being pro-welfare state and pro everything else.
And my main criticism of him, and we're going to move on to a different topic, as I wrote in RedState.
Please do.
Was look, the Pope wants for things like better sanitation to occur in the world, and he wants for clean air quality to be improved, and he wants for things like diseases like malaria to be stamped out, and he talks about all these things. And I don't think that he understands that the number one way to accomplish all these things is to make people wealthier. The number one, this is an absolute fact. I mean, it's not controversial point. The number one predictor of how happy and healthy you're going to be and disease-free you're going to be and what your environment is going to be like is how well off materially you are. And I get that there's a definite biblical tradition that says that you don't care about those things and you embrace poverty and so on and so forth. But you can't then at the same time say, well, we also want to not have disease and we want to have good sanitation. I mean, they're just flatly inconsistent. So,
you're such a greedy Protestant.
There's no other way to put it. I barely even qualify.
My biggest criticism of the Pope is that he said Buenos Dias. So let's make sure that Trump knows all about that.
So yes, we got a Trump fan on the show. So let's go and talk about Trump. Let's move on to our next topic, which is going to be 2016. We're going to go to Joe and then to Jeff. Joe, you get the first question on the 2016 round table. Let's talk a little bit about Trump. I think Trump had a bad week. Look, we've said a billion times before, Trump had a bad week. And I don't mean in terms of any other candidate would have had a bad week. I think this was a bad week for Trump in the sense that it wasn't just that he had gaffes and he said things that were ridiculous and ludicrous. I think that if you're a Trump supporter, this is kind of the first week that it hasn't been fun to be a Trump supporter, right? Because he basically had to eat crow to Carly Fiorina in the debate. He came as close as he ever has to apologizing. He looked tired and exhausted in the last hour of the debate. Threatens to sue the Club for Growth because they ran attack ads. Then he declares he's going to boycott Fox News and spends all night, passive-aggressively tweeting about the Fox News host who he's clearly sitting at home watching on television. I don't, as I wrote at RedState today, I think that the thing that kind of buoyed Trump to prominence is this feeling that he has, and Jay Koss wrote about this, he engenders this feeling that he's hosting the world's biggest party and everyone's invited. And it kind of gets the sense now that it's getting to the part where it's winding down, everybody's had way too much to drink, they're all wanting to go home, they're looking for their car keys, and Trump's the last guy kind of stand up and say, no guys, don't leave, stay around, come back. I mean, do you think that we've kind of finally seen the Trump train start to turn a little bit toward the downhill such that we could expect him to lose the lead in the reasonable future?
I think that we see WWE Hall of Famer Donald Trump losing a lot of support, and it's really going to start going to Carly Fiorina and Ben Carson because they see the exact same thing, that whole DC outsider thing, and it is going, and they see it done in a classier way. They see what Carly Fiorina brings and the way she handled Donald Trump, and all of a sudden that whole bombastic nature of the WWE Hall of Famer is just it's no longer appealing. You're right. The kegger's over. Everybody's starting to get that really bad hangover feeling, And there's still some out there. I just got a tweet a little while ago about a Trump supporter saying that Bobby Jindal should go back to Baton Rouge and suck on a Slurpee. And so we still see that out there. We still see some of those Trump supporters out there, but I don't see those numbers going after the outspoken on Twitter like we did. And I think that's because we're starting to really see him losing. He's not losing his edge. And I think that's what the Fox News thing was about. That was a last desperate attempt to hold on. Let's find a boogeyman, because if there's one thing he's good at, it's finding the boogeyman and playing the victim. And people aren't buying it anymore. He's having to, he's repeating his act. He's going back to the Fox News thing that's not working this go round.
So Jeff, let's go to you. We talked on the radio on Friday about Carly Fiorina. What is her ceiling? Where the polls going to be? In terms of when the dust settles, and it looks like she's basically moved herself from the 5% realm to kind of the 10% realm, and maybe a third through fifth place tie, basically with Jeb Bush and Marco Rubio. And now you're kind of seeing a lot of the long knives come out for Carly in terms of the Trump supporters and the Jeb supporters. Everybody seems to go after her. What's your sense of where she goes from here? Does she stay at this plateau? Does she go up? Or is this going to be a thing when the examination of her record becomes more thorough that she's going to kind of fall back to earth in the 5 or 6% range?
If you're as natural a performer as Carly Fiorina is, you're probably going to do a pretty good job keeping yourself afloat regardless. This is why her supporters and her campaign were always really focused on getting her into the main stage debate. They knew that their horse could run if you put it on the track, and her performance basically proves that. But as you pointed out, just today alone, you've seen a couple of really big, really bad stories that I personally have known about for years, but had otherwise not really been raised up until this point because Carly wasn't seen as a threat. The oppo is dropping.
And we're talking here just for the people who might not. She had in 2013 she expressed some support for the individual mandate, which of course is kind of a death sentence for your political futures in the Republican primary. And
yes. She says she stands by it, which I find to be unacceptable. She tries to buffer it by saying she's only for a catastrophic care mandate, but that's not the issue. The issue is not whether Obama's full coverage mandate is bad, but a lesser mandate would be better. It's the principle of the mandate, and she doesn't seem to grasp that the people who are really most moved on this issue are going to object to the principle and not the fact. But the other thing is her record at HP is going to come back to bite her, and people are already raising it. The people are coming after her. Now, is that record going to be fully aired immediately? No, I don't think so. The problem for her is that there isn't another chance for her to shine in the immediate future. The next debate is a month and a half from now. A month and a half, which is
a month, October 26th, I think.
Well,
so
it was a month and a half after the last debate. So, which is just again a terrible scheduling decision by the RNC, who I would literally want to spend a half an hour just raking over the coals for the idiocy in the way they decided to schedule this entire.
And it's on CNBC, which nobody even knows where that is on their cable dial.
Exactly. They fought the last war. They literally thought it was going to be 2012, and they should have known that it wasn't going to be 2012. But anyways, so Carly doesn't have those opportunities available to her. So it's kind of going to be interesting to see whether her numbers take a dip between now and then because of this oppo dumping. I tend not to think that they will, for the simple reason that the way you really get this out to voters is through ads. And nobody's really running ads yet because it's still October of 2015. But I think it's gonna eventually halt her advance.
Aaron, our producer, wants to jump in with a comment. Go for it, Aaron.
Well, yeah, I just wanted to jump in with a couple things since my audio didn't work last week. Everybody on this panel who was here last week can attest to the fact that I said that he started to bleed last week in that debate, and. It's not stunning that Trump is actually seeing a little bit of plateau at this point, and that there's not a million people signing up with him, but instead you see more support going towards people like Ben Carson on his Facebook page, and then also, of course, you have Ted Cruz gaining support when Walker's dropping out. But the other one is Marco Rubio gaining a lot of support. And I think you're going to probably, in my own prediction, you're probably going to see Marco Rubio bump up a little bit more in the next month, basically because he's the guy who's probably the most close to Perry's optimistic vision. And then the other thing I wanted to say on Carly, I was a big Chuck DeVore supporter back in 2012. And I knew back then Carly Fiorina, 2010. I knew back then that Carly Fiorina wasn't running as a conservative. She was an NRSC pick, and that was who she was. And I think she's a really amazing person. I think she could probably be an excellent president. But if we are going back, if we're walking away from Trumpism and all that, we're going to start looking at conservatism again. I'm going to move away from Carly and probably towards someone like Rubio myself. So I would expect a lot of Perry supporters to do the same.
Guys, I just have the total 100% conviction, as I wrote today. Rubio is going to win this thing. I'll give anybody a $100 bet right now, straight up. Rubio versus the field. Anybody on this panel wants to take me up on that bet, we'll make it right now.
I said this last year, so I got you beat.
All right, so Beckett's on. Beckett, we're on. $100. Beckett's got the field. I got Rubio.
I'm still holding the Bush. I still think it's going to be Bush.
Okay. Oh, you're insane, Beckett. But one other thing, I just want to also note that back in January, I said that Scott Walker wasn't going to be the guy, and pretty much everybody on this panel, except for Caleb Howe and Joe Cunningham, thought I was insane for saying it. So I just want to note that. And with that, I also want to say Hillary Clinton is not going to be the Democratic nominee.
All right. So let's go. We're not ready to talk about Walker yet. We're going to talk about the death of the Scott Walker campaign in a minute. I want to go to Caleb first. I want to talk about Ben Carson. The biggest story of the week, probably on the Republican side, after the debates faded away, was, of course, Ben Carson's comments about the would he support a Muslim for president. Talk a little bit about that, furor, Caleb. What did you think about what Carson said? What did you think about his kind of follow-up clarification, if you will, to that? And how would you rate the way the other candidates respond, of course, when they got the idiot questions from the media comes around and asking, what did you think about what Ben Carson said?
I must have missed the clarification. I only heard the original comments. What was the clarification?
I think that, and I don't have it right here in front of me, but he came back and basically said that. Does anybody have the direct quote here? He basically said what I think all of us understood him to say, which is just he's talking about his own personal opinion. He's not saying that they should be automatically disqualified. He's just saying his own personal view.
I mean, that's not even a clarification. Who didn't know that?
What he said right off the bat is that he wouldn't vote for a Muslim if that person didn't support American values. And the media is so stupid, they don't know what American values are and why that's a big differentiator and why that might be a problem for some radical followers of Islam.
Yeah, and I think one of the things that he brought up in his subsequent remarks was he says, look, from what I understand of Muslim doctrine, a Muslim would not be able to affirm the oath that the President of the United States is required to take. And so that was kind of where I was coming from on that. Look, I don't know enough to answer that question definitively.
Well, we already have a Muslim congressman, so I think that he can take his oath of office if he was a Muslim president. And because right there he's asking if they're a very faithful Muslim, which really isn't his place to ask. But no, I mean
you say who didn't understand that, but I mean you had a bunch of idiots going out.
It doesn't require a clarification to state what is obvious. This happens all the time, and usually on the right. I'm sorry to say. When you say something like, oh, gosh, I really think that job, people who do that job should be paid more, the first response you get from people on the right on Twitter is, oh, I guess the government should set wages then. Okay, well, that's not what I said. I didn't say the government should set wages. And he didn't say the government should prevent Muslims from running for president. He said he wouldn't vote for one, which is a perfectly fine thing to say. In fact, it's so fine that it's been said before, but about a different religion, over and over, about Christianity, including just in the last couple of cycles against Barack Obama. I mean, people said that about Huckabee. They wrote Slate articles and Salon articles about theocracy in America and how George W. Bush's belief in the end of the world as Christian doctrine, in the belief in the Second Coming, made him unqualified to be president because he doesn't care enough about the continuation of Earth. This is why Republicans can't run for office of any kind, because they don't care about global warming, because they think the world's going to end anyway. This stuff is said all the time.
And not just said, polled. Pew has done multiple polls. In fact, the big story going around, peddled by The Advocate, was the fact that Americans were more likely to vote for a gay candidate than an evangelical candidate. They found that 53% of Americans would not vote for. Only 53% of Americans would vote for an evangelical candidate. They found that 56% would vote for a gay candidate, and instead of going, look how bigoted America is, the thing was, look how out of step evangelicals are.
That's right. And when Mitt Romney was running,
it's been about 40% of the American electorate wouldn't vote for a Muslim, and the only group that is more, how should I say this, more unpopular than Muslims and gays and evangelicals is atheists. And I have to say I trust the American people on one of those four things. So, and nobody calls that bigoted. All he said was he wouldn't pull the lever. So I think it's pretty silly, and it's the type of question that would never be asked of any Democrat.
That's the other thing. That's exactly right.
What do they say? Like, hey, would you vote? Like, all you have to say is, would you vote for a pro-life Catholic? And then we'd have to show the same sort of outrage.
Yeah, let's go ask the Democrat candidates today, this week, while this is happening, if the Pope were running for president, would you vote for him? Let's go ask them that.
No, you have to phrase it correctly. You have to go, if the anti-gay marriage pro-life Pope was running for president, would you vote for
him? That's right.
I'm still waiting for somebody to ask Hillary how many genders there are.
How many what?
How many genders are there?
They don't ask them these pointed questions.
Yeah, no, and I mean,
no, that's not true. John McCormick at the Weekly Standard is really good at asking candidates about pro-life questions.
And they splash that up all over the networks.
Well, like you can't blame him because people ignore him, but at least
I mean, here's one thing I'd like to see out of the Republican Party is we keep going for the 20-week ban, right? And everyone goes, oh, that's too extreme. We should just work back and go, okay, here's a 9-month week ban. Let's get you on record saying you'd veto that, President Obama. Okay, good. Let's get an 8-month ban. Let's get and just roll it back, and then we'll find out. Do Democrats really want to go on record supporting a 9-month ban? That's something that if we got them on the record doing, that's something this do-nothing terrible legislature could do to win back my trust, is to do something politically astute like that instead of just surrendering.
And you don't have to start. But didn't Clinton? You could start very easily at week 24.
Yeah, 40. We'll just go week by week. We'll put up a new piece of legislation every week.
I think you start at 24. You say, here's 24. Now we are in line with the most liberal abortion regime in Europe. 24.
But didn't Clinton just last week say no to this?
Who refused to go on record saying that they would oppose aborting born-alive full-term infants. They refused to say. She refused to say that she would oppose that.
The best moment
just to disagree with Planned Parenthood.
Yeah. Was when he basically got Barbara Boxer to say that a baby was a baby when the parents brought it home from the hospital.
That's right.
So Becket, let's go to you. So let's talk about the way the Republicans respond to these questions. And I'm not talking about Ben Carson. What I want from the Republicans to do is just to have the sense to not do what Ted Cruz did, which was to say, this is the second week in a row I've had to kind of crap on Ted Cruz on this show against what I would like to do.
Neal would be proud.
I know. I guess somebody's got to stick up for what Neal's shtick is in Neal's absence. But, look. Why would he say, I'm a constitutionalist and I don't believe in a religious test? As Caleb said, that's not what the man said. It's not what he was even discussing. Why can't a Republican just say, look, I'm not going to answer questions about what Ben Carson said. I'm here to talk about, what I believe, and then just answer the question yes or no. I mean, why are we so stupid at this game?
See, that's honestly, it's a great question, and I don't understand it. There are a few people who are able to have really been able to harness this sort of thing and turn it around. One of the biggest moments from 2012, I'm sure you all believe, is when Newt Gingrich was able to say that bullshit question from John King about Gingrich's past marriages, and he turned it around. It was one of the biggest moments of the debate. People were cheering. It was forceful. It was eloquent. It was well stated. It channeled into everything that everyone hates about the press. And then sometimes you have these moments when politicians try to get cute with I wouldn't even call them gotcha questions. They try to get cute with stupid questions, like Todd Aiken. He couldn't just answer the stupid question. He tried to get smart and funny with it, and then we got the Todd Aiken moment. Likewise, we see people like Ted Cruz, and you have these moments when you're like, how have you not been prepared for this? We see this with Jeb Bush. Jeb Bush was asked about Iraq. Did he not see this coming 14 years in the making? No answer in place. Likewise, we saw this in the debate when he had this moment where he demanded Donald Trump apologize to his wife, and Trump says no. And then Jeb Bush just had, like we talked about this last week, he just had this moment. He's like, well, okay. Like, did you not prepare for this contingency? And this is what I don't understand about a lot of these GOP candidates. And we know, like Caleb makes a great point. A lot of the press just pours on the stuff, then ignore the stuff that like John McCormick does. But the thing is, this has been the game for what, 3, 4, 5 decades? How have we not adapted to this at this point? How are the candidates not ready to feel this stuff?
He's the only one who gets it at the current field. He's the only one that I've seen on Rubio.
Rubio is very good at turning stuff around.
On national television, he's
I was going to say Carly's pretty good, but there's actually one who doesn't. I don't think gets as much credit as he should. Huckabee is actually fairly good on the cuff turning some of this stuff around. He's constantly asked to respond to Trump stuff, and he's really good about saying, I don't give a shit about that. I want to talk about me, and he just ends it like that. It's great. It works. If Huckabee was not so low, infuriating.
It's infuriating about Trump or about Cruz. And final thing I'm going to say about Cruz, he's gone for months now, refusing to criticize any of the crazy ass stuff that Donald Trump has said in even the mildest way. Like, no, I'm not here to talk about Trump. And he gets this bullshit question about Carson and just flubs it. Just absolutely doesn't even respond to what Carson said. I was just as disgusted as I could be watching that exchange. So
we all know what that is.
Yeah, look.
He won't touch Trump because he wants to pick at Trump's sloppy seconds. That's all this is about.
It's not working for him, and it's not going to work. There's no evidence in the polls that it's going to work. Anyway, it's ridiculous. Let's move on. We want to talk a little bit about Scott Walker. This week saw the second candidate of the race drop out.
Leon, do you have a cat? Was that a cat?
Yeah, is somebody killing that cat? Yeah.
Is the cat okay?
That is not a cat. That is not my cat.
That's not a cat?
Joe,
that is not my cat.
Is that a small child?
No,
Joe, do you have a cat?
Yeah, but my mic's
Joe
been
from
muted.
the panel. His silence is indicative of guilt.
Silence is consent.
All right, so let's go. Let's talk a little bit about Walker. Walker followed it up. Walker was actually in the lead for a while earlier this year, and his departure from the race was kind of shocking because, I mean, look, there are a lot of, and I understand the money problems that he was having, and he used to be high in the polls, and now he's down in the polls, but he's still ahead of a lot, of guys who, for all we can tell, are going to be in this race forever, or at least until Super Tuesday.
Is he at 0%? Is he really, though, at 0% in the polls?
Well, I mean, he's still, RCP average was about 2. I mean, he did clock a 0 in one of the polls.
This is something everyone talks about, the margin of error. Scott Walker could have been as low as negative 3% in that poll. Just like everyone was like, I'll vote for Hillary if Scott Walker is nominated.
Well, Joe, you've written actually a couple of different pieces, kind of as postmortems of the Walker campaign. What do you think happened? What went wrong with the Scott Walker? What was really a love fest at the start of the year?
A couple things. First of all, everybody that in our boss at RedState, Eric, had mentioned this, I think on his radio show, I'm not sure about on the front page, but had mentioned that Scott Walker's closest allies and staff went to work for the Super PAC. And so all the people that he's really close with, he could legally not talk to anymore, and brought in a bunch of outside advisors, including Rick Wiley, who I have heard is not very well liked among political circles, and even more so, there was a rumor, an unsubstantiated rumor that hasn't been made public, but something bad happened that could have been involving Rick Wiley. And it was enough to scare a lot of donors. A letter was circulating around. BuzzFeed mentioned that there was a rumor, but didn't comment on it. There was no way to really verify it because nothing leaked out. But Wiley had built up the Iowa staff so much at the same time that the money was not coming in as much as in a Politico piece Wiley had that Wiley did. It was just one where he's basically venting He said there was a week where we were supposed to get $500,000 and we got $184,000, and at the same time they had a larger Iowa staff than even Jeb Bush. And so had Walker not bowed out, the campaign was going to be in debt by next week. I mean, they just had no money left, fundraising dried up, and now all those mega donors are being split up, I think, between like Cruz, Rubio, and Bush, and I think Rubio is picking up the really good ones. Cruz is getting a lot of small dollar donations, and he'll continue to get those. Bush is trying to pick off some of those Walker donors, is maybe getting a couple, but not nearly enough, which is, again, going to feed that narrative that we are more than likely going to come down to a Cruz-Rubio final, and kind of like you, Leon, I kind of see it going to Rubio right now.
So, Jeff, talk about Walker's influence on the rest of the race. And I think that one of the things that he did, which I liked, was by getting out of the race now, he essentially allows himself a 2-month/3-month period between now and Iowa where people can kind of forget his dumpster fire of a campaign and remember, hey, we really like this guy, and he did a lot of things that we were in favor of. And I think that he's set himself up in a really good position to have an influence on the race going forward if he wants to. Do you think that that's something that Walker has an interest in doing? And if so, where do you see him throwing his support?
He's not going to have much or any influence on the race going forward. He's going to lick his wounds and go home to Wisconsin and try to mend fences with the people in the legislature who he royally pissed off throughout the course of this campaign by basically stealing a lot of their thunder. I know a couple of the people in the Wisconsin legislature. My wife spent a lot of time in Madison, and I spent a lot of time there too. He stepped on a lot of toes, basically by taking credit for a lot of the accomplishments that happened under his governorship, and he's gonna, if he wants to, at least have the remainder of his term, to say nothing of running for re-election, he's gonna have to mend some fences. Because he was in such a small percentage of the vote when he dropped out, and because he dropped out so early and ignominiously, he's not going to have that much influence going forward. His endorsement will be a nice signal for some people, but it's not going to drive that many votes in Iowa or anywhere else. Joe covered, I think, the really, to me, important reasons why Walker had to drop out now, because of finances, just the horrible burn rate and the overspending. But what I think is less discussed is why Walker had to drop out at all, why his campaign really went pear-shaped. And it's because for somebody who seemed to be so certain of who he was and who he wanted to be and what he wanted to accomplish on the state level of Wisconsin, he completely forgot who he was on a national level. And he didn't seem to, Joe, are you abused? Or anyways, he seemed to have no idea who he was supposed to be on the national stage, and he ended up following Trump and being somebody who was following the lead and essentially was reactive in that campaign, which is a terrible look for someone like Walker, who was already a little bit boring enough as it is. And it just doomed him. It just doomed him in a place where you don't have that kind of self-possession to speak on a national level. You can get away with gaffes like not knowing enough about foreign policy if you seem to know who you are and you seem to be comfortable in his skin. Walker never seemed like that. And I don't know if he's going to ever do it on a national level from now on. I think he's done.
And this is a point I wanted to bring up earlier, was the fact that, the big news coming out is that when people polled Scott Walker supporters and said, who are you breaking for? And like 3/4 of them said Rubio, and you're like, that is fantastic news for Rubio. This is what's emboldened him to speak out.
3/4 is 0%.
Oh, okay, yeah. If you want to steal my my talking point, Joy.
Yeah, absolutely. You've been doing it to me all day, Bill.
Oh, I've been doing it to you. All right, steal this talking point. There once was an e-cig smoking guy whose clean image was a total lie. Amongst all the strippers, he's known as a big tipper, which makes up for his douchey tie. That was Brent Cochran writing for Becket Adams. And the YouTube section is just great today.
This is award-winning interactive television here, folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt Harvey.
Let's go. All right. So, Caleb, you had a point you wanted to make. Go ahead and jump on in.
Oh yeah. Well, this was not related to the topic. Something for the close. Is that fine? No, it's just something that got missed today in the news. If you know who Doris Kearns Goodwin is, she's a biographer of presidents. She was infamously plagiarized her biography of JFK. Since 2008, she's been very deeply embedded with the Obama campaign. She's a confidant of his. She helped him craft his image as Lincoln Part 2. So she's very inside. She was doing commentary for MSNBC on the Pope's visit today as he was leaving at the airport, and she was asked, because she's a historian, about the historical significance of his vote. And I'm not kidding you. This is what Mrs. Not Mrs. Obama, but Mrs. He Should Be the President Forever had to say. I think at a time when so many of us in America are hungering for leadership, what we're seeing in the Pope is a true leader. I mean, somebody who is accessible, as we see with that warmth, somebody who's got empathy, who sees things from other people's point of view, somebody who's learned from his own failures, as he says he did when he was too autocratic in the early days. And it's an extraordinary thing. It shows that's what we want in leaders. I'm sure that she didn't intend it that way, but if there's a better indictment, President
And that was the most powerful erotic experience of my life. I have never orgasmed more, I think, since I've been alive.
This is award-winning interactive television here once again, guys. Let's go back. Are we live? I still have a frozen video.
We're live, buddy.
All right, I assume we are. So let's go to McMorris.
19 people picked up.
Got it. Yeah. So let's go to McMorris. Who do you think will be the next? Let's go to the next. Who do you think will be the next candidate who will drop out of the race after Walker? Lindsey Graham and George Pataki do not count as candidates.
Okay, good. So Gilmore. I nailed this one.
Gilmore also does not.
Gilmore 2016. Gilmore 2016. Shut up.
No. You know what? I'm imagining it's going to be Santorum. Christie and Jindal are too confident coming off of the last debates. The other two you mentioned don't count. All right, so who's the next one to drop off the big debate? If Jeb Bush can keep, if Chris Christie is unable to strip anybody from Jeb Bush's fundraising juggernaut, if he can't do that, I don't see how he continues in the race. Now, Chris Christie is lucky enough right now to kind of fly under the radar. So he hasn't had the scrutiny, and he hasn't had the kind of attention that chases donors away the second stuff goes wrong, which is what you saw with Perry and with who was that guy who dropped off?
Walker!
He was like a governor or something? Oh, yeah, Walker. So yeah, if we're not talking about any of the minor league guys, I would definitely say it's Christie from the big stage.
And I think that it's kind of a shame because I think Christie, did very well for himself. I thought in the debate, but he doesn't seem to. He doesn't seem to have any kind of room left to really pick up traction in the field right now. I just don't. I think really his moment has just passed him by, and I think sooner or later he's going to have to realize that. So let's move on and talk a little bit about Rubio, and I'm going to go to Caleb here. Evaluate, if you would, Rubio's kind of post-debate week. Rubio, I think a lot of people thought that he probably finished second in debate behind Fiorina, but he's had since then a lot of kind of prominent airtime and a lot of discussions with Walker donors and people. How do you think Rubio has acquitted himself, kind of coming off the post-debate high, especially as compared to how Carly has done?
Well, I don't think that I would compare it to how Carly has done. I think they've both done very well handling their bumps in the polls. Obviously, Rubio has come out looking presidential, even more than he did before. His exposure to the American population has really benefited his airtime on CNN and MSNBC. Obviously, he already had plenty on Fox. And he has a good beat, and you can dance to him.
There you go. All right, so
also the next candidate to drop out will be Joe Biden right before he jumps in.
There you go. There you go. Joe, who do you think? What do you think? Kind of the thing that everybody's having difficulty in terms of predicting this particular election cycle in terms of what is going to happen is Ted Cruz. And Eric is of the opinion that Ted Cruz will be the last guy left standing on stage with Marco Rubio. I am considerably more bearish on his chances. I mean, look, he just stays at like 7 to 9% pretty much no matter what. What do you think Ted Cruz's ceiling in this particular debate is, and do you think that he's going to end up having as much of an impact as Eric thinks he's going to have?
I think that Ted Cruz's ceiling is whatever Donald Trump's ceiling is. Because Trump is the only one of the outsiders who has really been able to, get that whole outsider vote in. Now, granted, are some of the more vocal supporters of Trump ideally what Cruz would want? Probably not, and I say what, not who intentionally. I think that WWE Hall of Famer Donald Trump is going to bottom out here shortly. His support is going to go largely to Cruz, in smaller part to Fiorina and Carson.
Why does everyone say this? Why does everyone assume it? I see no evidence that is going to happen, or that there's any hope that it's going to happen. What?
Because it hasn't happened yet. The people that are going to go from Trump to Cruz are still with Trump right now. Well, there's no attrition of Cruz voters yet.
Hold on, no. Who are the people who are currently with Trump? Where were they before they were with Trump? They were with Walker.
Are you saying he doesn't have any supporters right now?
Yeah, no, people don't seem to realize that Trump doesn't just draw from the ultra-conservative part of the base. He draws from everything. He draws from liberal Republicans more than any other demographic. People don't get it. They just think Trump, crazy wacko, he must be getting the Tea Party vote or something. No, he gets moderate Republicans, liberal Republicans too. Those people
the two main things that people say is that he fights the people in Washington, so he's anti-establishment. Right, he fights. And 2, immigration. And those are Cruz's 2 main qualifications as well. He's a natural fit. That's why they fit together so
well. But those people don't like Cruz.
That's what the people on Twitter say. That's what the people on the internet comments say. But if you look at where if you take an RCP graph and look at the part where Trump starts going up, that is the part where Walker and Bush start going down. He pulled his numbers clearly mainly from the Walker and Jeb Bush camp. The Ted Cruz line, which existed before Trump,
is also name recognition. A lot of the people who vote for Trump aren't politically connected, and they know who Bush is and they know who Trump is. Of course, in the early polls, you're going to see that correlation. As time goes on, Cruz, Rubio, these people, Carly, they're all getting more face time. They're getting, and then the ads are going to start.
But the point that Leon is making is that Cruz's line has been steady the whole time.
It would stand to reason that if Cruz is pulling from the same pool of people that Donald Trump is playing for, that's clearly Cruz's thought process. I think he's wrong though, because it would stand to reason that Cruz existed before Trump did. So if Trump was pulling from the same group of people, then Trump's entry into the race should have caused Cruz to fall. Right. It didn't. When Trump experiences dips in the polls, which he's had a couple, it should cause Cruz to rise. It doesn't. Cruz stays.
But that's assuming that Cruz is pulling from Trump's pool, that Trump was pulling from Cruz's pool, as opposed to.
What I'm saying is that he did.
Trump's pool. But, right. No, of course Trump didn't pull from Cruz's pool, but that doesn't mean Cruz won't pull from Trump's pool.
And what I think is going to happen here is Cruz has played, he's done the television interviews, he does what Cruz does. We've not seen really major ad plays from him. We've not seen any, outside of Cruz being Cruz, we haven't seen any major plays from him. I think the moment he has a lot of money that he's sitting on.
Yeah, but he doesn't have the money to run campaigns this early in his campaign. He has money for later.
And it's smart on his part to not do so.
Right.
If he waits and lets Trump accumulate this mass of anti-Washington, D.C. people, and then he makes a play for him the moment Trump bows out, that's when that support carries over. It's not going to carry over like that for Fiorina, who I think will have fizzled out by then.
And people have been saying this entire...
Hold on.
You yourself, Leon, this whole podcast, everyone has been saying this whole podcast that it's the outsiders that are getting the votes. That is an arena in which Ted Cruz plays, the outsider.
No, not really. He's an insider.
The outsiders. Yeah, no. If you look at this, it's
maybe
like
people on Twitter.
Fiorina is Tom Cruise. Rob Lowe is Donald Trump for now. Ralph Macchio, that's Ted Cruz at most. Come on. You guys never saw it? It's my wife's favorite movie. I had to plug it. Anyway.
He's no WWE.
There's actually something to be said for the people who are remaining steady. And I've made this point a million times about why I respected Rubio's strategy of not calling out Donald Trump until today when he finally did it. But for months and months, he let people jump on that bayonet. And he just talked above and ignored Trump. And I think Cruz is kind of doing the same thing without taking a critical tone. He's not even criticizing the policies that Donald Trump advocates, which is why I think he is here to win it. Yeah, he's only at 7% now because he thinks he's going to get a 25% boost the second that Trump jumps out of the race and we still have 8 people left.
Let's take the opposite of that.
And that is a big calculation.
Jeff and Leon need to answer.
Tell me if I'm wrong in that Trump seemed like he was ready to drop out after 2 months, and it shocked him how much support he got. Please tell me I'm wrong, because he was the guy who was sitting there like, I'm just here to make sure nobody treats me unfairly.
Donald Trump
sounded like, hey, don't embarrass me. I'll drop out. I'll leave on my own accord, and I'll still support the Republican at the end.
Donald Trump is a lot like Ahmed the Clockmaker. He had this hoax that he was going to run with, and holy crap, the hoax has gone way out of control.
Yes.
And now Ahmed the Clockmaker is a serious contender for president of the United States.
Yes.
How quickly you forget that Donald Trump had to pay people $50 a head to come to his
initial campaign.
Let's look at the opposite of what Bill was saying. Let's look at the people who have attacked Donald Trump. Let's look at Jeb Bush. Hadn't worked out well.
That's what I was going to say. Yeah.
But let's look at Bobby Jindal. He's got nothing to lose, and he hasn't bowed out, and he hasn't really lost any support by doing so. Granted, he was at the bottom of the barrel anyway, but Jindal, because he's taken this tactic and he is using online trolling in a way that really only the Donald Trump supporters from 4chan have really been able to do up until now. Jindal has taken online trolling to an art form in being able to attack Trump because he doesn't have the money to really run massive spots either, but he's holding his own in that field, and that's why I actually see him possibly making it onto the stage the next
round. Does that speak to Jindal being bulletproof?
So hold on a second.
You haven't heard from Becket. Lack of influence of the internet.
Becket, what do you think about all this?
Well, I think one of the issues with any sort of attack, going back to what Joe was saying, Jindal has been trying, Bush has been trying.
You're fired. This was not your line.
I'm sorry?
That was not your line. You had a line.
You're supposed to say quite.
Oh. But on the issue of attacks, going back to talking about Jindal or talking about Bush, attacks only work and boost a candidate if they land. Jindal hasn't been able to land anything. Trump has got this, they call him Teflon Don. Bush is the worst attack candidate I've seen in a long time. He looks like just a sissy little kid on a playground who, like we said last week, he has that moment where he tries to fight the bully, but it's actually a comedy and the bully wins. But the thing that we've seen recently, and we saw last night, is somebody found what gets Trump, what attacks land, and that's Fiorina and people who referenced her questioning his masculinity. That stuff lands. That sticks with voters. If you can actually make a candidate slip and trip up and look like you've actually drawn blood, that'll work. Jindal hasn't done that. Bush hasn't done that. Fiorina actually kind of did that. And then you saw last night with Lowry with the snip comment he was talking about, whatever the actual technical term is for cutting off someone's balls. But that stuff lands. That's
called castration. It may be a personal subject. I don't want to bring it up, but yes.
But that stuff lands. That works. And so I think while people are saying these attacks on Trump haven't boosted candidates, I would counter and say, well, that's because they haven't done it right. These are lousy attacks. Once somebody actually figures out what cuts the dawn, then you will see a boost. And I think we're seeing that right now with Fiorina.
All right, so listen, we got to wrap up. We're way over time.
Will Jeb pick up Trump voters? That's the question.
So we're way over time. Let's wrap up. Want to thank everybody for tuning in. Want to thank my panel for being here. Thank you, Jeff Blehar, the Ace of Spade's Decision Desk. F. Bill McMorris, who has left us, but he was here, from the Washington Free Beacon. Thank you, Bill, for being here. Becket Adams of the Washington Examiner. Thank you, Caleb, for filling in for Scott Lincicome, who once again came up with a dodgy excuse at the last minute. And thank you as well to our guest, Joe Cunningham of RedState. Thank you all for being here, and we hope that you'll tune in next week to the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Friends.
Love you.
Thanks.
Listen. One thing I think that people really don't get right about Trump support is that, first of all, he is bringing people into the process. These votes.